a freezing night, a desperate mother, and a silent rancher who hasn't opened his door or his heart in 10 long years. But when a little girl knocks, everything changes. What begins as a shelter from the storm becomes a fight for family, for love, and for the one thing they've all lost: hope. If you're new to the channel, make sure to subscribe, like this video, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Now, let's jump into the story. The wind howled across the snowy hills of Idaho, cold and sharp like broken glass. The storm had come in faster than anyone expected, swallowing the trail in a curtain of white. Trees bent under the weight of snow, and the sky was the color of ash. Mira Callan pulled her wool shawl tighter around her shoulders. It did little to keep the cold out. Her dress, once tidy, was torn and soaked at the hem. Her boots were worn through at the toes, and every step forward felt like walking on knives. But she kept going. She looked down at the small figure beside her. "Just a little farther, Lottie," Mira said softly. Her voice cracked from wind and worry. Lottie didn't answer. The 6-year-old girl walked in silence, her mittened hand holding tight to her mother's coat. Her cheeks were red from the cold, and her small face looked pale against the dark fabric. Mira was scared. They had been walking for hours after. The wagon's wheel snapped on a frozen rut. There was no fixing it in this storm. The snow had covered their tracks almost as fast as they made them. If they didn't find shelter soon, the night would not be kind. Then, through the swirling snow, Mira saw it, a light, faint and flickering. She blinked, unsure if her mind was playing tricks. But no, it was real. A single golden light from a window, barely visible through the storm. She picked up her pace, nearly dragging Lottie behind her. Her breath came in gasps now, painful and sharp. They reached the porch just as the last of her strength gave out. She reached up and knocked, once, twice. Then, harder. There was no sound from inside. Mira tried to call out, but her throat gave only a broken whisper. Inside, Harlan Ridge sat in a wooden chair near the fire, a mug of cold coffee untouched beside him. The wind outside had been roaring for hours, but he paid it no mind. It was just another storm, just another night. Then came the knock. He frowned. No one ever came this far up the ridge, and certainly not in weather like this. He stood slowly, his knees stiff. He grabbed the old hunting rifle from beside the door, not out of anger, just habit. He cracked the door open. There, in the storm, stood a woman. Her hair was stuck to her face, her eyes full of fear and frost. A child stood next to her, leaning into her side. "Please," the woman rasped. "We don't need much. Just a place to wait out the storm." Harlan stared for a moment, silent. His heart didn't beat fast, but something in his chest felt tight. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice flat. "Mira Callan," she said, swaying slightly. "This is my daughter, Lottie. We've been walking since noon. Our wagon broke outside, the pass." He looked down at the girl. She didn't speak, just looked up at him with wide, glassy eyes. "I don't take in strangers," he said. Mira sank to her knees, arms around Lottie. "I'm not asking for your food or money," she said, her voice shaking. "I just don't want my little girl to die out here." Something in those words struck him like a match to dry wood. He stepped back, inside. "Before you both freeze." Mira didn't wait for a second offer. She half lifted Lottie and stumbled across the threshold. The warmth inside hit her like a wall. She nearly collapsed. "Sit by the fire," Harlan said, already moving to a nearby chest. "Don't touch anything." He tossed a thick quilt over Lottie's shoulders, then handed another to Mira. She took it with shaking hands. "Thank you," she whispered. He didn't answer. He turned to the kitchen and poured hot water into 2 chipped mugs. "No tea," he said. "Just heat." They drank in silence. "This isn't permanent," he muttered after a moment. "Storm breaks, you move on." "I understand." He turned, his eyes toward Lottie, who was curled up under the blanket, her small hands holding the edge to her chin. "She's lucky you knocked when you did." Mira gave a faint smile. "No, sir. I'm the lucky one." For the first time in many winters, Harlan Ridge wasn't alone in his house, and though his words were still cold, something in the air had begun to shift. Outside, the wind screamed against the cabin walls, but inside, the fire flickered like a heartbeat. Quiet, steady, and warm. And that was how a stranger's knock changed the silence forever. The wind outside had calmed by morning, but snow still lay heavy on the land like a thick white blanket. It covered the fences, the barn roof, and the crooked trees that lined the ridge. Inside the cabin, all was still but not silent. For the first time in years, Harlan Ridge woke to the sound of someone else moving about. The quiet clink of a spoon on a tin cup. The soft scuff of footsteps across his wooden floor. He sat up slowly in his bed, unsure how he felt about it. It was strange, not unpleasant, just different. When he walked into the main room, Mira was standing near the stove. She was barefoot, wrapped in a blanket, holding a tin mug in both hands. She looked up as he entered. "I hope it's all right," she said quickly. "I didn't touch anything, just needed to warm my hands." He nodded once and walked past her to the window. Snow had drifted high along the barn. The road was completely gone. "Storm buried the trail," he said. "Won't be going anywhere for a while." Mira didn't speak right away. Then she looked over at Lottie, still sleeping by the fire, the heavy quilt tucked under her chin. "I'm sorry to intrude," she said softly. "I know this is your place and you didn't ask for any of this." Harlan turned toward her. He didn't say she was right. He didn't say she was wrong either. He just stared for a moment, then walked into the kitchen to fill the kettle. They spent most of the day in near silence. Harlan repaired a broken hinge on the back door. Mira sat by the fire, quietly mending the torn seam of her coat. Lottie colored in the ash of the fireplace with a dull stub of charcoal she'd found near the stove. The hush in the cabin wasn't uncomfortable. It was just soft, like the house itself was learning how to breathe again. Later that afternoon, Mira stood to stretch her legs. She walked over to the wall by the stairwell. There, hung low and half-covered in dust, was a faded photograph. She tilted her head, studying it. A woman and a small boy stood in front of the same cabin. The woman was smiling, holding the boy's hand. Both looked warm, alive, and happy. "That your wife?" she asked quietly. Harlan didn't answer at first, then he nodded. "My son, too." "What happened?" "Fever took them. Both. Same week. 10 winters back." Mira didn't reply. She didn't need to. Some pain doesn't require words to understand. That evening, Harlan made a simple stew. No meat, just potatoes, carrots, and salt. He didn't ask Mira to help, but she did anyway, chopping vegetables with steady hands. It felt almost natural, like something they'd done before. As they ate, Mira finally spoke again. "My husband died 2 years ago. He was a kind man. Quiet. Like you, actually." She gave a small smile. "Worked as a train porter. Saved every dollar to buy a little land. Got sick before he could see it." Harlan looked down at his bowl. He stirred the stew, but didn't lift his spoon. "After he passed, I stayed in Missouri with Lottie, sewed dresses for neighbors, tried to make things stretch." He looked at her then. Really looked. "What made you leave?" She glanced toward her daughter, then back to him. She started asking why we never smiled anymore. The room grew still, again, but this time it wasn't empty. It was full of something quiet and warm. After supper, Harlan handed Lottie a small wooden box. Inside was an old deck of playing cards and a few marbles. "They belonged to my boy," he said. "He was about your age." Lottie looked up at him, eyes wide. Then, without speaking, she reached out and hugged him around the waist. Harlan stood, still, arms at his sides, unsure of what to do. Then, slowly, awkwardly, he rested a hand on the back of her head. That night, after Mira laid Lottie down near the fire again, she sat by the window with a blanket draped around her shoulders. Harlan joined her, holding 2 mugs of hot water. I don't talk much, he said quietly. Mira gave a soft laugh. Neither do I. He handed her a mug and sat beside her. For a while they just listened, to the wind outside, to the fire cracking in the hearth, and to the small sounds of a sleeping child who'd begun to feel safe again. This house has been quiet for a long time, Harlan said, almost to himself. Mira nodded. Sometimes quiet is heavy, but sometimes it means peace. He looked at her. Really looked, for the first time. I don't know which one this is yet. Mira didn't push for an answer, she just smiled. We'll find out. And in that quiet cabin, built from wood and sorrow and memory, something began to shift. Not loud, not sudden, but steady. Like the slow stretch of sun over a winter field. Like a heart that had forgotten how to open, learning to beat again. The snow melted slowly over the next few weeks. The white hills turned to wet mud and quiet streams. The world outside Harlan Ridge's cabin began to breathe again, and so did the people inside it. Each day felt a little warmer. Mira swept the porch in the mornings. Lottie helped gather eggs from the hens. Harlan fixed a broken fence rail and found he didn't mind the sound of small feet running across his porch. The silence that once filled the house was gone, replaced by soft laughter, shared meals, and the gentle hum of life returning. But spring doesn't always bring only flowers. One morning, as Mira was brushing out Lottie's hair, there was a sharp knock at the door. Not soft and desperate like hers had been. This one was hard, demanding. Harlan opened it, frowning. A tall man stood outside, wearing a dark coat and a wide-brimmed hat. His eyes were cold, his face sharp like a chisel. He didn't smile. Morning, he said. Name's Grayson Flint. I'm here about the girl. Mira froze in place. Her hand dropped from Lottie's hair. What do you mean? Harlan asked, stepping forward. Grayson's eyes flicked toward Mira. She's my niece, he said. Lottie. Her late father. My brother left some land in her name. Didn't matter much before, but now it's worth something, and I aim to make sure it's in the right hands. He held up a folded piece of paper. Legal custody, signed and stamped. Says I have the right to take her. Mira's breath caught. You haven't seen her in years. You never wanted her before. Grayson shrugged. Didn't need to. Now I do. Harlan stepped between them. You're not taking her. Grayson narrowed his eyes. You sure you want to stand in the way of the law, mister? She's not going anywhere, Harlan said, his voice calm but firm. Not without a judge saying so. And not while she and her mother are under my roof. Grayson gave a dry smile. We'll see what the court says then. He turned and walked off, his boots crunching over the gravel, leaving the paper on the porch like a warning. Mira picked it up with shaking hands. Inside the cabin, Lottie clung to her mother's skirt. Who was that man, Mama? She asked. Mira knelt and smoothed her daughter's hair. Just someone who doesn't understand what family means. That afternoon, Harlan rode into town. He stopped at the sheriff's office, hat in hand. Sheriff Miller, an older man with silver hair and tired eyes, looked over the paper. It's real, he said, but it's not final. Not without a court ruling. I want to fight it, Harlan said. Sheriff Miller nodded slowly. You'll need someone to speak for you in front of the judge. I'll find someone. Word spread fast in Cedar Hollow. Folks didn't often get in each other's business, but everyone knew about the quiet rancher on the ridge. And now they were hearing about the widow and her little girl too. One by one, neighbors started to stop by. Mavis brought a basket of bread and jam. Finn, the teen who helped in the stables, offered to take care of the horses during court days. You're not alone in this, Mavis said, her voice kind. Not anymore. Days later, the courtroom was small but full. Grayson stood on one side, arms crossed, his lawyer sharp and well-dressed. Mira sat on the other with Lottie curled beside her. Harlan stood behind them, silent but steady. When Grayson's lawyer spoke, his words were clear. My client is family, blood. He's offering a future for this child. When Harlan stood, he didn't use many words. Family isn't just blood, he said. It's who shows up. It's who stays. That little girl is already home. Taking her would tear something good apart. Then Mira spoke. Her voice shook, but her words were strong. My daughter has never known safety like she has on that ranch. We didn't ask for much, but what we found there is more than we dreamed of. A warm bed, a roof, a place to laugh again. The judge listened without a word. Then to everyone's surprise, a small voice spoke up. I want to stay, Lottie said from the front bench, her voice clear. The room was silent. I don't know that man, but I know Mama, and I know Mr. Ridge. He makes the best bread, and he fixed my mittens, and he tells good stories. I don't want to go. The judge took a long breath. I need time to consider. Back at the ranch that evening, the fire burned low. Mira sat at the kitchen table, her hands shaking slightly. I'm sorry, she whispered to Harlan. I never meant to bring trouble here. Harlan looked at her, then at Lottie, who was drawing quietly by the hearth. You brought something else too, he said. You brought life. And as night fell across the land and stars blinked into view above the fields, the shadows of the past still lurked. But now, they weren't the only thing in the room. There was light too, the kind that grows from love and hope, and a quiet promise. We'll face the dark together. The day of the final hearing arrived with a soft breeze and skies clear as glass. Spring had touched the land with gentle hands, blossoms on the trees, grass pushing up through the mud, and the sound of birds returning to the quiet hills. Inside the small-town courthouse, people filled the benches, shoulders pressed close. Most of them weren't there for the law. They were there for something bigger, for Mira, for Lottie, and for the quiet man who had once kept his doors shut and his heart locked tighter. Mira sat on the front bench, her hands clasped in her lap. Lottie leaned against her, clutching a small carved wooden bird Harlan had given her that morning. Harlan stood beside them, his weathered coat freshly brushed, his eyes steady but unreadable. Grayson Flint looked sharp as ever. His lawyer shuffled papers, smirking as though the outcome was already certain. The judge entered. The room fell still. For a moment, it was only the ticking of the old clock on the back wall that filled the silence. The judge cleared his throat and began to speak. I've read the documents. I've heard the testimony. I've watched a child speak with more truth than most grown men ever manage. What I've seen is not a fight over property or blood, but a question of what kind of home a child needs. He paused, then looked at Mira. This court finds it in the best interest of the child to remain with her mother, Mira Callan. Lottie gasped. Mira's hands flew to her mouth. The judge continued. And further, I see no reason to separate her from the stable environment she's found at Harlan Ridge's residence. The petition from Mr. Grayson Flint is denied. A wave of relief swept through the courtroom. A few neighbors clapped softly. Mira cried openly. Lottie squeezed her carved bird tighter, her face glowing with joy. Harlan simply nodded. Quiet, steady, the way he always was. But his eyes shone like sunrise on still water. Later that day, back at the ranch, a small gathering began. Not planned, not formal, just neighbors dropping by, some with pie, others with fiddle music, and all of them with warm hearts. The sun dipped low across the hills, turning everything gold. Lottie ran around the yard with Finn's younger brother, her laughter echoing between the barn and the cabin. Mira stood near the porch steps, her dress fluttering in the breeze, her eyes never far from her daughter. Harlan stood under the big oak tree by the corral, his arms crossed, watching it all. Mavis, the old nurse, came to stand beside him. Didn't think I'd live long enough to see you host a party, she said with a grin. Harlan gave a rare chuckle. Didn't think I'd throw one. Lottie soon ran up to them, holding a wide-brimmed hat much too big for her. Mr. Ridge, she said, panting. Can I wear this? Mama says it was yours when you were a boy. He took the hat gently, brushed the dust from it, and knelt down. You can wear it, he said. But only if you promise to fill it with good things. Kindness, courage, maybe a little mischief. Lottie giggled. I promise. He placed the hat on her head. It slid low over her ears. You look like a real cowgirl, now, he said. From the porch, Mira watched, one hand over her heart. As the sun lowered behind the ridge, the music slowed. The guests sat on blankets and benches, sharing stories and warm cider. Then Harlan cleared his throat and walked toward Mira. In his hand was a small box. I never figured I'd get the chance to say this, he said quietly. But you and Lottie, you brought light back to a place that forgot what it was. You made this cabin a home. Mira's eyes brimmed with tears. He opened the box. Inside was a simple silver ring. No jewels, no flash, just a tiny carving of the same bird he'd given Lottie, gentle and free. I carved this for you, he said, so you'd always remember where your new life began. She didn't speak at first, just stepped closer and wrapped her arms around him. Yes, she whispered. Yes to the ring. Yes to the home. Yes to all of it. Behind them, Lottie ran up and wrapped her arms around their legs. We're a real family now, she said, her voice soft but sure. And Harlan, who once believed his heart was a place only ghosts lived in, smiled and rested his hand gently on her shoulder. That night, under the stars, they stood together beneath the wide Idaho sky. The wind was calm. The world felt still. And in that moment, with the firelight behind them and the sound of laughter in the air, they knew. They had found something rare, something worth fighting for. Not just shelter, not just safety, but home.